The first time he walked into that restaurant, the room went silent. Not because he was rich people here had seen wealth before, but because he looked at one woman like the world had stopped spinning. Her fork froze midair. The man across from her, her date, leaned forward and whispered, "Do you know him?" She did. And she also knew that when Jack Hale showed up without warning, something was about to break a rule, a heart, or maybe the fragile piece she'd built after losing everything 9 years ago. That night, a simple dinner turned into the kind of story a small town never forgets, the kind where guilt meets grace, and two people who should never have crossed paths again are forced to decide what forgiveness really means. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe now. Let's begin. The candles along the window flickered like nervous hearts. Outside, gulls traced white arcs over the harbor, wings flashing against the last ribbon of amber sky. The Gull and Anchor smelled of lemon butter and old wood polish, a restaurant that liked to pretend it was fancier than it really was. Claire Whitman had chosen it for that very reason, elegant enough to feel special, humble enough to let her breathe. Across from her sat Adam Pierce, a man whose calm made her uneasy in a good way. His hands were teacher's hands, ink-smudged, careful, forever folding into gestures when he spoke. He'd been telling her about the seniors' field trip to Boston, about how one kid nearly lost a shoe on the subway. She'd laughed, the sound lighter than she expected. It had been a long time since laughter felt natural on her tongue. "You deserve calm waters for once," Adam said, swirling his iced tea, eyes soft. Claire looked down at her plate salmon, perfectly seared, and smiled faintly. "Calm waters," she echoed. "Not sure I'd know what to do with them." Her gaze drifted past the glass. The tide was pulling out, revealing the dark ribs of the pier. The town's new seawall gleamed under the streetlight, the one funded by that tech billionaire. What was his name again? Jack Hale, the man people either thanked or resented, depending on what side of the harbor they lived. She'd seen him once, maybe twice, when the community center dedicated the new docks. A polite man with the eyes of someone who'd forgotten how to rest. Adam reached for the wine list, joking that he trusted her taste better than his own. She hesitated. Dating again, after years of widowhood, still felt like walking barefoot on broken glass possible, but each step required courage. The server poured a refill. The sound was almost soothing. Then the door opened. A rush of cold air spilled through the room. It was sharp, with the smell of rain and salt. Conversations faltered, heads turned. Standing in the doorway, shaking droplets from a dark wool coat, was Jack Hale. Claire froze. For a heartbeat, she thought she was imagining him. But there he was, taller than she remembered, rain darkening his shoulders, eyes sweeping the room with intent so focused it bordered on desperate. Diners whispered behind napkins. A couple near the bar actually pulled out a phone. It wasn't every night a billionaire walked into a small-town restaurant on a Friday evening. Adam leaned forward, whispering. "You know him." Her pulse thudded in her ears. "I work with his foundation sometimes, hospice grants." But that didn't explain why he was here. Now, staring straight at her table, Jack's gaze met hers, and the air changed temperature. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He simply started walking steady, quick strides that made his shoes tap against the floorboards like a countdown. People moved aside. The restaurant, moments ago filled with the easy hum of conversation, was suddenly silent except for the low cry of the wind pressing at the windows. Claire Adams said again, uncertain, a note of protectiveness in his voice. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Jack stopped beside their table. The faint scent of rain and cedar came with him. His expression was grave, the kind that stripped away any pretense of politeness. "Mr. Hale," Claire managed, trying to steady her tone. "Is something wrong?" He ignored the curious faces turned their way. The cell phones half raised. His voice was quiet but urgent. "You need to come with me. Now." The room seemed to tilt. Adam straightened, defensive. "Excuse me." Jack's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Claire. "Please," he said, softer this time, though the tension underneath hadn't eased. "It's important." A server hovered nearby, uncertain whether to intervene. The piano music in the background faltered, then stopped altogether. Somewhere near the bar, someone whispered, "That's Jack Hale, the seawall guy." Claire's chair scraped against the floor as she rose, instinct before reason. "What's going on?" she demanded, voice low but steady. "I'll explain outside," Jack said. His gaze darted toward the back hallway, toward something unseen. "It's not safe here." The phrase struck her harder than it should have. Not safe here. At a restaurant Adam stood too, shoulders squared. "Look, whatever this is." Jack turned to him, calm but unyielding. "Sir, you'll thank me later. Just get everyone to step outside for a few minutes." The certainty in his tone unsettled her. Jack wasn't a man prone to theatrics. He'd once spoken at a fundraiser for the hospice center, data-driven, reserved, the kind who measured words like money. Seeing him now, soaked from the rain and visibly shaken, made her stomach twist. "Claire," he said again, lower now. "Please, trust me." Her pulse hammered in her throat. She looked at Adam, kind, bewildered, his hand hovering near hers, and then back at Jack, whose restraint looked like it was hanging by a single thread. Something inside her, the same instinct that had guided her through emergencies and goodbyes, whispered to move. Without fully understanding why, she grabbed her coat from the chair and followed him toward the door. The cold air swallowed them whole as they stepped outside, the sound of the sea rising against the rocks. Behind her, the restaurant murmured back to life confusion, curiosity, half-formed gossip. Adam's voice called her name, faint and uncertain through the glass. She didn't turn around. On the sidewalk, rain began to fall harder, carried sideways by the wind. Jack faced her, breath clouding the air, eyes sharp with something between fear and urgency. "What's happening?" she asked, clutching her coat. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Something's wrong inside that building," he said, "and we don't have much time." The words hung there impossible, chilling, too precise to ignore. Claire felt the world narrow to the sound of rain on the awning, the pulse in her ears, and the stranger who suddenly wasn't a stranger at all. Rain drummed harder now, blurring the streetlights into trembling halos. Claire pulled her coat tight, breath rising in short bursts. Jack stood close enough that she could see water streaking down his cheek, indistinguishable from sweat. "What do you mean something's wrong?" she demanded. He held up his phone. On the screen glowed a dashboard filled with graphs and blinking icons, one flashing red across the top: carbon monoxide alert, gull and anchor, boiler room sensor 2A. "This place," Jack said quietly. "Your restaurant. The sensor tripped 3 minutes ago." Claire blinked, half not believing. "You're telling me what the air's poisoned?" He shook his head. "I'm saying it might be. I installed these sensors through my foundation temporary monitors while the fire department finishes their own rollout. For now, alerts route to me. I'm supposed to call it in if the building manager doesn't respond, but this one he lifted the phone again. Came through, and the manager's line went straight to voicemail. A gust of wind slammed the awning above them. Through the restaurant window, she could still see Adam, watching from their table. Confusion etched across his face. The diners had returned to their meals, unaware that danger could be building, invisible as breath. Jack's voice softened, but the urgency sharpened his words. "I've already called fire rescue. They're less than a mile away. But we need to clear people out now." Her pulse climbed. "You can't just walk in there shouting about gas leaks." "I didn't shout," he said. "I came to you because people listen to you here, not me." The logic cut through her resistance like cold air. She glanced at the window again, then at the phone's red warning. Carbon monoxide colorless, odorless, quiet. She'd seen its victims in the hospice before. Blue lips, the gentle drift between sleep and never waking. Still, pride tugged at her. The room inside was warm, full of laughter. Her first fragile attempt at normal, she could already hear what people would say. The widow panicked. The billionaire's latest project malfunctioned. Another overreaction. Jack read the hesitation in her eyes. "Claire, this isn't about reputation. It's about air." Her thumb brushed her phone screen, Theo's smiling face lighting up the lock screen, gap-toothed and alive. That single image tipped the scale. "Fine," she said. "We'll do it together." They stepped back inside, rain trailing behind them. The hostess started to speak, but Claire raised a hand. Her voice carried through the chatter. "Excuse me, everyone," she said, calm but firm, the way she spoke to families on the worst nights of their lives. "We've had a possible gas alert. Please, step outside for just 5 minutes while they check it. It's probably nothing. But let's be safe." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then someone laughed nervously. "You serious, Jack?" moved to the manager, a balding man in a white shirt, now the color of worry. "Check your boiler room sensors," Jack said, showing him the phone. "If you've got detectors of your own, see if they're reading anything. If not, assume the worst." The manager frowned. "Those things give false alarms all the time. We had one last month, whole night wasted. This isn't a false alarm," Jack replied, steady as stone. "You want to gamble that against 40 lives?" The manager's mouth opened, then closed. He turned to the staff. "All right, folks, let's just step out for a minute. Grab your coats." The clatter of chairs filled the room. Murmurs rippled. A woman at the bar asked if she could take her drink. A father lifted his toddler, whispering something gentle to keep her calm. Claire moved between tables, reassuring as she guided people to the door. Her nurse's voice came back like muscle memory. "It's only a precaution. Stay close together. We'll be right outside." Adam met her eyes as he slipped on his jacket. "You're sure about this?" "Not sure," she said. "Just certain enough." Outside, the night had turned raw. 42 degrees with a wind that bit through fabric. Diners huddled on the sidewalk, steam rising from their breath. Jack stood slightly apart, phone still in hand, scanning the dashboard. The red icon pulsed, then paused, still active. "You said fire rescue's coming?" she asked. He nodded. "Engine 3, half a mile. Should be here any minute." The restaurant's windows glowed behind them, the world inside looking safe. Ordinary. Claire's heart thudded in rhythm with the rain. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she just emptied a building on a false alarm. The manager reappeared in the doorway, trying for a smile. "We checked the boiler. Nothing out of place. No smell. No smoke. I told you, these tech sensors." He didn't finish. From the kitchen corridor, a shout broke the uneasy quiet. A young line cook stumbled into view, one hand gripping the frame. His skin had turned the color of paper, lips tinged gray. "I feel dizzy," he said, slurring slightly. "Can't catch my Jack," lunged forward, catching the man before he hit the ground. Claire was already there, fingers at the cook's neck, pulse fluttering weakly. The metallic taste of panic filled her mouth. "Get everyone farther back," she called. Now the crowd moved as if one heartbeat had commanded it. Chairs scraped, someone screamed, and the manager's face drained of color. He yelled toward the kitchen. "Shut it down. Get the doors open." Jack eased the cook to the pavement, keeping him upright for air. The man coughed, eyes rolling slightly, confusion clouding his gaze. From down the street came the first echo of sirens, thin at first, then swelling, bouncing between the narrow buildings. Red lights cut through the fog like veins of fire. Claire pressed the back of her hand to her lips, relief and dread colliding. Jack's hand brushed her shoulder steady, grounding. "You did the right thing," he said. She looked at him, eyes sharp with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "So did you," she whispered. Behind them, the fire truck pulled to a halt, brakes sighing like exhausted lungs. Firefighters rushed past, masks ready, shouting orders. The scene erupted into organized chaos. Claire stepped back, watching the doorway where warmth and laughter had existed minutes ago. Through the smoke-gray rain, she could still see the faint glow of the candles on their abandoned table. 2 plates, one untouched. Adam stood a few paces away, coat collar up, confusion shading into awe. Their eyes met briefly, no words, just an understanding that the evening had changed shape forever. Jack turned to her again, phone still glowing red in his hand. For the first time, she noticed his fingers trembling slightly. "You get alerts like that often?" she asked. He shook his head, gaze fixed on the building. "Not like that one." The sirens grew louder, closer, then softened as the engines idled. The cook was taken onto a stretcher, an oxygen mask sealing over his face. Claire exhaled slowly, realizing she'd been holding her breath since the moment Jack had appeared. The red icon on Jack's phone blinked once more, then went still. And, for a moment, the only sound left was the sea, whispering against the pier as if nothing had happened at all. The rain had thinned to mist by the time the firefighters gave the all-clear. Steam rose from the wet pavement, curling around the ankles of the crowd. The flashing lights painted everything red and white faces, windows, the slick cobblestones that led down toward the harbor. Claire stood beside Jack as the lieutenant spoke with the restaurant manager, voice level but firm. "You got lucky," he said. "Trace carbon monoxide, low concentration, but it could have climbed fast. One of the older flues was half blocked. Another 20 minutes, and you'd have had a few more down." The manager nodded, pale and silent. The young cook who'd collapsed was sitting up on the back of the ambulance now, wrapped in a foil blanket, color returning to his cheeks. He was breathing steadily, even laughing weakly at something one of the EMTs said. Claire's shoulders dropped for the first time in what felt like hours. "Thank God," she murmured. Jack nodded beside her, water dripping from his hairline, eyes still fixed on the scene. "Yeah," he said softly. "Thank God for sensors and stubborn nurses." She almost smiled, but something in his voice, that taut mix of relief and guilt, kept her quiet. When the last of the firemen began packing up, the news van arrived. Claire felt her stomach twist. Of course they'd come. Rockport wasn't a town that let a story go quietly, especially one involving the richest man within 50 miles. 2 reporters hurried over, cameras already rolling, umbrellas useless in the damp wind off Bearskin Neck. "Mr. Hale," one of them called. "Is it true one of your foundation's monitors caught the leak?" Jack turned slightly, posture calm but guarded. "That's correct," he said. "We fund community safety tech in older buildings. Tonight's alert came through that system. And you were here by coincidence," the reporter pressed, microphone gleaming. Claire watched as he considered how much to explain. He looked briefly toward her, not for permission, exactly, but acknowledgement. "No," he said finally. "I was nearby and came to verify. I wanted to make sure people got out." The cameras panned, catching Claire in the frame. She felt exposed under the lens, still damp, hair frizzed from the rain. Jack's hand hovered near her shoulder, not touching, just there, protective, instinctive. That small gesture, innocent as it was, would be enough for Rockport to start its whispering. The reporter's smile sharpened. "And you, ma'am. You're Ms. Whitman, correct? Folks say you helped clear the building. I just asked people to step outside," she said quickly. "Anyone would have—" Jack turned to her, his expression unreadable but steady, a quiet gratitude behind his restraint. Cameras flashed anyway, capturing a story neither of them wanted written. By the time the reporters moved on to the firefighters, Claire could feel every stare, every small-town calculation clicking into place. She could already imagine the online threads, local nurse and billionaire hero save dinner crowd, or was it a date gone wrong? Adam appeared through the dispersing crowd, his coat collar pulled up against the wind. Relief softened his features when he saw her, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "You okay? I'm fine," she said, brushing rain from her sleeve. "Good." He hesitated. That was something. "You did great." His gaze flicked to Jack, who stood a few paces away, phone pressed to his ear, talking quietly with a firefighter. "I'll call you tomorrow," Adam said, voice low but sincere. Yet the look that passed between them carried a quiet understanding he meant it. But he knew, whatever this was, however innocent, he'd just become the third person in a room of 2. She nodded, unsure what to say. "Drive safe." He lingered half a second, then turned toward his car. Footsteps splashing through puddles that glowed red under the siren light. The wind shifted, carrying the faint metallic tang of the sea. Jack ended his call and approached, shrugging out of his soaked coat. "Here," he said, holding it out. "You're freezing." Claire took a step back, shaking her head. "I'm fine." "You're shaking." "From adrenaline," she said. "Not weather." He studied her face, not challenging, just searching, and then lowered the coat. "You don't like being saved, do you?" She let out a thin breath. "I don't like being a headline." For a moment, neither spoke. Around them, the last of the crew loaded up, hoses clanging against metal. The restaurant lights flickered back on inside, half the bulbs still dim from the power cycling. People would remember tonight, not because anyone was hurt, but because something almost happened. In a town this small, almost was enough to feed conversation for months. A reporter across the street shouted again, voice carried by the wind. "Mr. Hale, one more question. Were you here to see Ms.?" Whitman Jack's shoulders tensed. Claire's mouth opened, but he lifted a hand slightly, silencing her without a word. He turned toward the camera lights, rain glistening in his hair. His face, the one usually reserved for press releases and charity galas, was suddenly stripped of polish. "No," he said evenly. "I was here to see that people stayed alive. That's all." It should have ended there. But the reporter's smirk made clear how the clip would play online. The phrasing, the tone, the unspoken yet. Claire felt her cheeks warm despite the cold. She took a small step back, needing space, needing quiet. "I should go," she murmured. Jack nodded once. "Do you have a ride? I'll walk. It's only 4 blocks. I'll make sure you get there." "I can take care of myself." "I know," he said softly. "That's why I want to make sure." The argument wasn't one she had the energy to win. She exhaled, tired, and started walking down the slick sidewalk. The seawall glimmered beside them, water lapping just beyond. Jack matched her pace but stayed a respectful distance behind, the two of them moving through puddles and streetlight shadows. When they reached the corner of Bearskin Neck, the town's old lighthouse blinked once through the fog, a slow, steady pulse. The mist made everything look dreamlike, unreal, as though the night might dissolve by morning. Claire stopped, turning just enough to meet his eyes. "Tomorrow, everyone's going to have a version of tonight," she said. "Let's not make it worse." Jack's voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind. "People will think what they want. But the truth, you were the only person in that room who didn't hesitate." She didn't answer. The wind tugged at her coat, carrying the smell of rain and iron, and something faintly electric, the scent that lingers after something dangerous has passed, leaving only the echo of what could have been. The streets were slick with mist, glowing faintly under the harbor lamps. The town felt emptied out. Even the gulls had tucked themselves into the dark crevices of roofs, waiting for morning. Claire walked beside Jack in silence, her boots splashing softly through shallow puddles. The seawall, wet from rain, glimmered like pewter. He kept half a step behind her, saying nothing, just matching her pace as they moved along the narrow boardwalk. Somewhere down the docks, the ropes groaned against their cleats, wood shifting and sighing like tired lungs. The smell of salt and diesel hung in the air, familiar, grounding. "Half a mile," Claire said finally, glancing at her phone. "You didn't have to walk me." Jack's voice was even, almost formal. "I know." They reached the curve of Harbor Street, where the small duplexes began, clapboard houses painted in tired shades of blue and gray, front porches cluttered with flower pots and wind chimes. The windows glowed with a kind of yellow light that made strangers look like family. Theo was at a sleepover. The house would be empty. Claire felt the thought like a small relief. Tonight's storm of attention, questions, cameras, it was enough for one evening without her son asking, "Why was Mr. Hale at your dinner?" At the gate, she turned. "Thank you for whatever that was," she said. "You probably saved people's lives tonight." Jack shook his head. "You did. I just saw a number on a screen." "Still," she said, "I'm grateful. But we need to talk about how you did it." He frowned slightly. "How I did what walked into a crowded restaurant and pulled me out without explanation. You don't get to do that. Jack, not at my table. Not in my life." The words hung between them, sharper than she intended. She saw the flicker of hurt cross his face before he masked it with composure. "I didn't plan for it to happen like that," he said. The alert came through, and I reacted. "I didn't think about optics or boundaries. He stopped, exhaling slowly. I just thought people might die. Claire crossed her arms, the night air cold against her damp sleeves. You could have called the fire department, or the manager, or literally anyone but me. I tried, he said quietly. The line went to voicemail. No one answered. So you decided to play hero. He looked at her, eyes steady. No, I decided to play human. That silenced her more than she wanted to admit. There was no arrogance in his tone, just a quiet conviction that made her chest tighten. I get that you're used to fixing things, she said. Funding programs, solving crises. But people aren't projects. Jack, they don't need saving the moment you think something's wrong. His jaw flexed. Maybe not. But sometimes they need warning. She wanted to argue, to tell him he had no right to step into her evening like that, no matter his intentions. But the memory of that pale-faced line cook came back his limp body, the smell of gas, the sound of sirens. The argument softened before it left her lips. Jack took a slow breath, looking out toward the dark water. You know, when we install new systems through the foundation, I get direct alerts for 30 days, he said, until the local departments are trained to monitor them themselves. She tilted her head. You mean every alert in town goes straight to you? For now, he admitted. After a month, they'll switch over. It's part of the trial process. I'm just the failsafe. Claire stared at him. So every time there's a flicker of danger, your phone lights up. He gave a small, humorless laugh. Pretty much. She shook her head. That can't be healthy. He smiled faintly. It isn't, but it helps me sleep. The irony didn't need explaining. He was a man trying to atone for something invisible, a private ledger of guilt she couldn't yet read. Jack, she said softly, you can't fix every wrong thing with a donation or a rescue. Life doesn't let you do that. His voice lowered. I'm aware. Then stop acting like you have to. He met her gaze. And if I hadn't tonight? She opened her mouth, then closed it. The truth sat heavy in her throat. If he hadn't come, she might have finished her glass of wine, laughed at Adam's story, gone home and read about tragedy on the morning news. The thought chilled her. She stepped back toward the porch. I just need you to understand the difference between doing good and crossing into someone's life uninvited. I do understand, he said, but if the same alert came again, I'd still walk through that door. There was no arrogance in his tone this time, just quiet certainty. Then I guess we'll keep disagreeing, she said, trying for calm. He nodded, respectful, but there was something unresolved in his expression, as though he wanted to explain himself and didn't know how. I should let you rest, he said. She nodded. Good night. Jack. He turned, rain-darkened coat brushing his legs as he started down the walkway. The wind picked up again, rattling the chimes on her neighbor's porch. At the edge of the sidewalk, he stopped. His back stayed to her when he spoke. I didn't come because you were on a date, he said quietly. I came because I can't lose any more sleep over something preventable. She frowned. What do you mean? Any more? Jack hesitated just long enough for her to know there was a story behind it, something he wouldn't share tonight. Good night, Claire, he said instead, and walked off into the mist, the sound of his footsteps fading against the wet boards. She stood there for a long moment, the words any more echoing like a half-heard confession. Inside, the clock on her mantel ticked softly. The house smelled faintly of salt and lemon detergent, ordinary peace after an extraordinary night. She hung her coat, switched off the light, and watched through the window as the harbor lights blinked once, twice, steady and patient in the fog. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment their stories had stopped running parallel and started bending toward each other, slow, inevitable, like the tide turning under a restless moon. The next morning broke gray and still. A pewter sky pressed low over the harbor. The storm had passed, leaving the streets damp and glistening, the kind of clean that only comes after chaos. Claire spent the early hours doing what she always did after a long night, returning to routine. Coffee, dishes, silence. Theo wouldn't be home until noon. She liked those quiet hours before he came bursting back with stories and crumbs and the endless hum of being ate. The house, for once, was still. She was wiping down the kitchen counter when the doorbell rang. Martha stood there in her fleece jacket, cheeks pink from the wind, holding the morning paper folded in half. Martha lived 2 doors down, a retired librarian who always knew the local gossip before the internet did. "You're famous again," she said, half smiling. Claire frowned. "Oh, no." "Oh, yes." Martha stepped inside, uninvited, dropping the newspaper on the counter. "Page 2. I only came to tell you before someone else does." Claire glanced down. There she was, damp hair, pale face, standing beside Jack Hale under the red glare of siren lights. The headline read, "Billionaire's Quick Action Averts Restaurant Tragedy." She groaned softly. "Perfect. Small towns," Martha said, with that sigh of knowing. "Anyway, there's something else. When I saw that name, Hale, it rang a bell, so I looked something up for you." She reached into her tote and pulled out a yellowed clipping, edges frayed, from the Rockport Chronicle, dated 9 years earlier. Claire unfolded it slowly. The headline was blunt. "Hale Systems acquires Kittredge Marine Engineering. 200 jobs affected." Her eyes snagged on the photo, a group of workers outside the plant gates, faces caught somewhere between defiance and disbelief. She knew that parking lot. She'd waited there once with a thermos of coffee for Ben when his overtime ran late. She read the first lines aloud under her breath, following a restructuring initiative. Hale Systems confirmed the closure of its newly acquired Kittredge Marine Division, citing efficiency realignment. The words blurred. The next paragraph mentioned seasonal layoffs, consolidation, cost control, and then, near the bottom, she found it, "Local families brace for difficult winter." That winter, her chest tightened. That was the same winter Ben had worked 2 side jobs to keep the mortgage afloat. The winter he'd fallen asleep driving home after a double shift in freezing rain. The night the police had come to her door, hat in hand, faces solemn. She sat down without realizing she'd moved. Martha's voice floated through the fog in her head. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just thought, well, you should know who you're dealing with." Claire didn't answer. She was somewhere else 9 years back, in a kitchen filled with unpaid bills, her husband's hands cracked from cold, the scent of motor oil and coffee mixing in the air. Ben had promised it was temporary, that the plant would reopen, that good work never stayed gone for long. She remembered how he'd said the name Hale Systems once, reading it off a notice tacked to the break room wall. Some Boston outfit. He'd muttered, "Doesn't care about a town like ours." She'd forgotten until now. Or maybe she'd buried it deep enough to live. Claire Martha's hand touched her arm. "You okay? I need a minute." Her voice came out thin, like air slipping through a crack. Martha hesitated, then nodded. "I'll let you be." She left quietly, the door clicking shut behind her. The clock ticked on the mantel. Outside, the harbor gulls cried, sharp and distant. Claire stared at the article until the words stopped making sense, until they were just black marks bleeding through thin paper. Then she folded it once, twice, with precise nurse-like movements, and placed it on the counter. Her hands trembled. 9 years of rebuilding, of forgiving life for what it took, of believing tragedy had been random, and now a name tied every thread together. The same man whose alert had saved her life had once, indirectly, dismantled the one she'd built before. Coincidence, fate, or something worse, the universe's cruel habit of circling back. Her chest burned with a quiet fury. She went to the window, down the street. Through the thinning mist, she could see the harbor office, the place Jack had rented when his foundation started its work here. A neat brick building with white trim, expensive but tasteful, like everything about him. She could almost see him there, sleeves rolled up, eyes on some screen full of numbers, calibrating risk, saving strangers, unaware of the names behind the costs he'd once tallied as efficiencies. Her phone lay on the counter. She picked it up, thumb hovering over his number. For a long time, she didn't move. In her mind, she saw Ben's truck headlights cutting through the snow that night. She remembered the call, the sound of her own breath breaking, the thought that if one thing, just one, had been different, maybe he'd have come home. Her thumb pressed the screen. The line rang once, twice, then his voice calm, familiar. Jack Hale. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The anger swelled up, hot and bitter, But her voice, when it came, was steady. "We need to talk about Kitteridge," she said. Silence. Not the kind of pause people use to gather words, the kind that happens when a truth lands exactly where someone expected it to. She heard him exhale, the faint scrape of a chair. "Claire," he began, voice lower, almost careful. She cut him off. "You knew." Another pause. The quiet between them stretched, taut as wire. "I think you should come by tomorrow," he said finally. There's context." "I don't need context," she said. "I need honesty." He didn't answer. "Jack," the line hummed softly, his silence louder than sirens. And in that silence, every wall she'd carefully rebuilt began to tremble. By noon, the harbor had turned silver under a thin sun, the kind that shines without warmth. The tide was low, the air heavy with salt, and the faint sweetness of seaweed drying on the rocks. Claire walked the length of the pier alone, her boots thudding softly against damp wood. She spotted him before he saw her. Jack stood near the end, sleeves rolled up, coat folded over the railing. The wind tugged at his hair, turning him into a silhouette against the water, a man poised between guilt and confession. He turned as she approached. "You came," he said. "I said I would." Her voice was calm, but her jaw was tight. She'd spent the night thinking about the article, about Ben, about every name she'd ever heard him mention with that smooth tone of philanthropy. It all sounded different now. Jack nodded toward the ocean. "I thought here might be easier. Easier for who?" He took a moment before answering. "For the truth." A gull cried overhead, and the sound carried like a question neither of them wanted to answer. She folded her arms, waiting. "When I bought Kitteridge," he began, "I was chasing scale. That's what every analyst said we needed: consolidation, efficiency, automation. It was numbers. Only numbers." Her eyes narrowed. 200 jobs aren't numbers." He nodded. "I know that now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn piece of paper, not a spreadsheet, not a contract, but an old memo printed in faded ink. This was the first warning. He said, "The CFO told me the plant was over-leveraged. That winter would break them if we restructured too fast. I didn't listen. I thought we were saving the company, and you saved yourself instead," she said quietly. Jack flinched as if struck. "That's fair." He leaned against the railing, eyes distant. The quarter closed strong. Investors applauded. I celebrated, thought I'd done something brilliant. Then the letters started coming: small-town mayors, families, suppliers. The layoffs hit in December. By March, half the town was gone. He paused, voice roughening. "I didn't know about your husband. I didn't know about anyone by name. Not then." The wind pushed waves against the pilings below, slow and relentless. Claire stared at the horizon, where the gray sea met the gray sky with no seam between them. "But you knew what happens when people lose work in winter," she said. "You grew up in Maine, didn't you? You knew exactly how it ends for people like him." Jack's expression tightened. "I thought I was different. Thought I could fix it from the top down." "You learned too late that systems don't feel pain. People do." He ran a hand over his face, exhaling. "That's why I started the foundation. The seawalls, the retraining programs, the small business grants, all of it was meant to repair what I broke. I've spent 8 figures trying to put the pieces back." Claire turned sharply. 8 figures, she repeated. "You talk about it like it's absolution." He shook his head. "No, just arithmetic." "Do you even remember their names?" she asked. "The people behind those figures, the ones who stopped being part of your equation." His eyes flicked toward her, then away. "I know some." "Name one." He hesitated. "Robert Lane," he said finally. "He was a foreman, father of 3. Wrote me a letter after the closure, said he'd lost his house. I kept meaning to write back, but the company had already moved on to another acquisition. 2 months later, his daughter emailed. Jack swallowed hard. He'd taken his own life. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Claire stared at him, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. "And you remember his name?" she said. Voice low, trembling. I do. Then carry mine, she said. He looked confused for half a second. Ben Whitman, she said, enunciating each syllable. Machinist. Husband. Father. He didn't make it through your winter either, so carry him with the others. Jack. Carry mine. He took a step toward her, but she backed away. Claire, you built your empire on efficiency, she said, her voice breaking now, the anger finally cutting through the restraint. You didn't mean to hurt anyone, but you did. And now you think donations, seawalls, and charity galas can balance the books. They can't. There's no ledger big enough to write that off. I know, he said quietly. That's why I don't stop. She shook her head. Maybe stopping is the only thing left to learn. They stood like that for a long time, two people tethered to the same pain, looking at different horizons. A fishing boat motored past, its wake rippling through their reflections. I wish I could undo it, Jack said at last. I would give every dollar back if it meant changing that night. Her voice softened, not with forgiveness, but with fatigue. You can't trade money for ghosts. He didn't argue. His shoulders sagged under the weight of years he couldn't rewrite. When she finally turned to go, the sun had broken through the clouds, scattering light across the water. She walked a few paces, then stopped. You said once you can't lose any more sleep over something preventable, she said without turning. You're wrong. You just did. Jack closed his eyes, the wind tugging at his shirt, the words landing heavier than anything she could have shouted. She left him standing there, the waves lapping against the pier. Gulls wheeling overhead like paper kites in a gray sky, a man surrounded by the sound of what couldn't be undone. The tide was low that morning, pulled back by 18 inches, leaving the granite steps at the harbor slick with moss and memory. The sky had cleared after days of gray, the kind of pale blue that made everything look newly washed. Theo crouched at the edge of the steps, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. A paper boat white, slightly crumpled, its corners darkening with spray, bobbed in the rippling water below. He gave it a gentle push with a stick, watching it drift. Go on, he whispered. Catch the current. A jogger slowed on the boardwalk above. Breath misted in the cold air, sneakers tapping lightly against the planks. Jack Hale, earbuds dangling loose around his neck, had been halfway through his morning run when he caught sight of the boy. Something about the folded boat tugged at recognition. The creased edges, the precise fold along the bow, it was identical to the ones made in the after-school STEM club at Rockport Elementary, the club he quietly funded, though no one knew. He stopped. That's a fine-looking vessel you've got there, he called gently. Theo turned, squinting against the sunlight. It's the SS Minnow II, he said proudly. First one sank. Every engineer's first boat does, Jack said, coming closer. Second one's when you start figuring out what floats. Theo grinned, clearly delighted by a grown-up who knew his language. I made it with printer paper and tape. Mom says if it lasts 10 minutes. It's a miracle. Jack laughed softly. Your mom sounds like a realist. She's a nurse, Theo said matter-of-factly, as though that explained everything. He crouched beside the boy, balancing easily on the uneven stone. Well, mister, Minnow, tell me this, did you give it ballast? Theo blinked. What's ballast? Jack picked up a small pebble, rolling it in his palm. Weight, something that keeps it from tipping when the wind pushes too hard. He dropped it into the hollow of the paper hull, careful not to tear the folds. A little weight can keep you steady, even in waves. Theo nodded solemnly, as if this were the most important truth in the world. So boats need heavy hearts to stay upright. Jack smiled, not the public smile for cameras, but something small and honest. Sometimes. Yeah, heavy hearts make steady ships. The boy let the newly weighted boat drift again. It caught the light, wobbling, but holding its course. Cool. Theo murmured. They watched in companionable silence, the water lapping gently against the steps. Jack felt the kind of calm he hadn't known in years, the kind that came from being near someone unburdened by what he carried. Did you go to the school club? He asked. Theo nodded. Yeah, But it got new stuff last year, computers and glue guns and stuff. Nobody knows who gave it. The teachers said it was an angel donor. He said the words like they were magic. Jack looked away toward the horizon, letting the wind fill the pause. Sounds like someone who believes in smart kids. Theo grinned. I think it was Santa. Jack chuckled, keeping his gaze on the boat. Good guess. He didn't notice Claire at first. She had walked down the boardwalk searching for her son. Her tote slung over one shoulder, her hair pulled back against the breeze. From a distance, she saw the two figures. Theo crouched, Jack beside him, and her steps faltered. Her body tensed automatically. The instinct to protect, to step between them, flared before logic could calm it. She made her way down the steps, voice steady. Theo, I told you not to get too close to the water when the tide's out. Theo turned, beaming. Mom, look, he helped me fix it. Now it doesn't sink. Jack rose slowly, brushing his hands on his running pants. Morning, he said. Morning, she replied, guarded. The sunlight caught in his hair, and she noticed he'd run without his usual polished no coat, no driver waiting nearby, just sweat on his temple and sea salt on his breath. It disarmed her more than she wanted to admit. Theo pointed to the floating boat. He says ballast keeps things from tipping over. That's true, she said, forcing a small smile. Even for people. Jack met her eyes briefly. We could all use some ballast. There was a quiet between them that wasn't awkward, just full of what had been said days before and what remained unsaid now. Claire bent down beside Theo, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. You ready to head home? Captain, just one more minute. Jack crouched again, pretending to study the boat, but he could feel Claire watching him. He didn't mention donations, or foundations, or guilt. He didn't mention her husband. He talked about wind resistance and angles and why triangles were stronger than squares. Theo listened like a scientist in training, soaking in every word. Claire, despite herself, felt something loosen in her chest, a thread of warmth she hadn't expected. You really know a lot about boats, Theo said. I know a little about what keeps them from sinking, Jack replied. The wind picked up, tugging the paper boat farther out. Theo leaned dangerously close to the edge. Claire reached instinctively to grab his jacket, but Jack was already steadying the boy by the shoulder, not tightly, just a protective touch. Then he let go as soon as Theo regained balance. Claire's heartbeat quickened, that old fear spiking again, not because she didn't trust Jack's hands, but because she did. And trust had become something she rationed carefully. Theo's voice broke the moment. Hey, are you the man who saved Mommy's dinner? Jack looked at him startled, then smiled gently. No. Kiddo. The censor did. Theo frowned. But you came in and told everyone to leave. I just listened, Jack said. The hard part was convincing grown-ups. Claire exhaled through her nose, something like a laugh, but not quite. He's right. Listening's the hard part. Theo crouched again, eyes tracking the boat as it bobbed farther into the cove. It's going, he shouted. Look, Jack shaded his eyes with his hand. She's got good balance. You did that. Theo looked up proudly. Yeah, I did. Jack smiled, then stood, stepping back. I should let you two enjoy the morning. Claire straightened, meeting his gaze. Thank you. For helping him. He nodded. It was my pleasure. He turned to leave, jogging slowly up the path. Theo waved. Bye, Mr. Boat Guy. Jack raised a hand without looking back. Keep it steady, Captain. Claire watched him go, the sunlight catching on his shoulders as he disappeared around the bend. The wind off the water lifted her hair, and for a second she thought about what he'd said. A little weight keeps you steady. Theo's boat drifted out, smaller and smaller, until the tide tugged it under. He let out a disappointed sigh. It sank, he said quietly. She touched his cheek. Then we'll build another one. He looked up at her, hopeful again. With more ballast, she smiled. Maybe just enough. As they turned to climb the steps, the gulls wheeled overhead, and far out on the water, the current carried something white and folded toward the open sea. The afternoon light lay thin and gold across the kitchen floor. Dust drifted in the still air like slow snow. The quiet inside the house felt heavier than usual, as if it had been waiting for her to sit down and finally listen. Theo was at his friend's house again, and for once, the silence didn't comfort her. It pressed. It asked. Claire sat at the kitchen table, the newspaper clipping Martha had given her still folded beside her coffee mug. She'd read it so many times the edges had gone soft, the ink smudged under her thumb. The headline didn't change. Neither did the date. The past never does. Her eyes drifted to the hallway closet, the narrow one at the end, where she kept tax folders, old letters, and a single cardboard box she hadn't touched in 8 years. She stood, the motion mechanical, and pulled it out. Dust rose, carrying the scent of old paper and something faintly metallic, like forgotten tools. On the side, in her own handwriting, faded by time, it read, Ben Accident Reports. She placed it on the table. For a moment, she just stared at it. Then she lifted the lid. Inside were the artifacts of a night that had divided her life neatly into before and after. Police forms, insurance claims, HR letters from Kitteridge Marine, the coroner's note, even the snow tire recall notice she'd refused to read past the first line. All stacked in rigid order, exactly 1.3 inches thick. She knew because she'd measured it once, early on, as if the exactness might make grief manageable. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out the top document, the crash report. December 12th, 2014. A stretch of Route 1A, 2.4 miles south of town. Black ice. No other vehicles involved. A defective tread on the left rear tire. Speed 41 miles per hour. She exhaled shakily. That number had been the quiet hinge of her life ever since 2.4 miles. So close to home. Next came the overtime logs. He'd worked 93 hours in 2 weeks. Overtime approved by the interim plant manager, not Hale Systems yet, but the previous owners already deep in debt. Notes in the margins about machine malfunctions, skipped safety checks, requests for replacements marked pending. She felt her throat tighten. The layoffs hadn't caused the crash. The system that demanded exhaustion had the same system that measured worth in output and efficiency. It wasn't Jack Hale alone. He'd inherited a culture already rusted through, but he'd signed the paper that sealed it. She pressed the page flat against the table. For the first time, she could see it, all the mosaic of failure. Not one villain, a web. It should have made her feel lighter, but instead, a strange hollowness opened inside her, because blame had been something solid to hold on to. Without it, she wasn't sure what she was gripping anymore. She leaned back, eyes closed, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. In the beginning, she had told herself anger was the only way to keep Ben present, that letting go meant forgetting. But as the years went on, she'd realized anger was just another kind of absence. It kept him frozen in that night, and kept her frozen with him. Claire opened her phone, scrolling to the voice recorder app. She pressed new memo. Her voice came out slow, almost detached at first, as though narrating for someone else. 8 years, she said. 8 years I've blamed the wrong things, the weather, the plant, the universe. It's easier that way. Blame is clean. But truth, she paused, the quiet stretching. Truth is complicated. It doesn't let you keep one villain. It makes you look at yourself, too. Her voice caught. She pressed stop. She sat there, staring at the phone, replaying her own words once, twice. They felt heavier out loud. The kettle on the stove whistled suddenly, sharp and intrusive. She turned it off, but the sound had already cracked through her thoughts. The house felt too full of echoes, Ben's laughter, the scrape of his boots by the door, the phantom weight of what they'd never said in time. She pushed the papers back into the box carefully, aligning the edges like a ritual. When she closed the lid, her hands didn't shake anymore. It wasn't peace, but it was something close to clarity, the kind that hurts before it heals. On the table beside her phone sat another ghost Adams number. She hadn't deleted it, though she'd told herself she should. After the restaurant, after everything, she'd assumed that Bridge was gone. But now, after revisiting the wreckage of her past, she realized she didn't want to keep burning every bridge she crossed. Some needed to be rebuilt, even the small ones. She opened her messages. For a long moment, she hesitated, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then she typed coffee sometime, no emergencies. Just a normal conversation. She didn't hit send right away. She looked at the window, where the tide had gone out completely, exposing the dark ribs of the harbor floor. Seaweed clung to rocks like tired hands. Low tide, the part of the day when everything usually hidden shows itself. She hit send. The message went through instantly, a small blue checkmark glowing on the screen. Claire leaned back, closing her eyes. The sunlight on her face felt warm for the first time all week. She didn't know what would happen next with Adam, with Jack, with herself. But she'd opened the box, named the truth, and still managed to breathe. Outside, the seagulls called again, circling low over the wet sand, the sound oddly comforting in its persistence. She whispered to the empty room, barely audible. Maybe that's what staying afloat really means. Then she turned off her phone, letting the quiet fill in the spaces the past had left behind. The Rockport Town Hall smelled faintly of old wood polish and damp coats. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, creaking under the weight of half the town. Outside, the sky was bruised with evening light, the kind that turned the harbor windows amber before fading to gray. Claire slipped into a seat near the aisle, notebook in hand. Her palms were cold. She hadn't planned to speak. She'd told herself she was only there to listen to understand how the town meant to handle the censor program after the restaurant scare. But the air already buzzed with tension. At the front, beneath a sagging banner that read Public Safety Committee Forum, a small table held microphones and pitchers of water. Jack sat among the panelists, posture calm, eyes unreadable. He wore a dark suit, but no tie, sleeves rolled back just enough to suggest humility. To his right sat the fire chief and two select board members, each with folders thick enough to look official. The moderator cleared his throat into the microphone. We're here to discuss the ongoing pilot of the carbon monoxide detection network, funded through the Hale Foundation. As you all know, he didn't get far. A voice rose from the back, sharp and carrying, "You mean the Billionaire's pet project?" Heads turned. It was Carl Jennings, a local contractor known for his opinions and his volume. "You drop tech in our buildings. It pings your phone, and we're supposed to call that public safety," he said. "Sounds more like surveillance to me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some in agreement, some in disapproval. Jack's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. He waited, fingers interlaced on the table. Carl pressed on. "You're not one of us. Hale. You build your seawalls. Fine. You put your name on plaques. Fine. But you're a tourist with money. You don't get to play savior and call it charity." The moderator tried to restore order, tapping the mic. "Please, Mr. Jennings." But Claire was already on her feet. The shift was subtle, but the room quieted. There was something about the calm way she stood, the same composure she used when telling families what no one else could. She didn't need a microphone. "I was there that night," she said evenly. Every eye turned to her. Even Jack looked surprised. "I was having dinner at Gull and Anchor when the alert came through. And I'll tell you what happened, not the newspaper version, not the rumors." She glanced down at her notebook, then up again. "A man walked into a restaurant and told us to leave. We didn't know him. We didn't know why. And we thought he might be crazy. But he wasn't. He'd seen something the rest of us couldn't, numbers on a screen that meant danger. We stepped outside. One of the kitchen staff collapsed. Fire rescue confirmed carbon monoxide in the air. No one died. That's the story." The silence was thick, respectful. Even Carl had stopped shifting in his seat. Claire went on, voice steady but soft. "But it wasn't just one person who saved that night. It was the line cook who spoke up when he felt dizzy, the manager who finally opened the doors, the waitress who herded people out instead of panicking. The tool helped. People saved people." A few heads nodded. She looked at Jack now, not unkindly, but not deferentially either. "Technology can do incredible things," she said, "but it doesn't absolve us of responsibility, and no single person should be the gatekeeper of every alarm. A low murmur of agreement rolled through the crowd. The fire chief shifted in his seat, nodding. "Mr. Hale," Claire continued, "your program worked. It saved lives. But for a town to trust a system, it needs boundaries. Private alerts shouldn't ping one man's phone, no matter how wealthy or well-intentioned that man is." The room exhaled, as if she had said what everyone else had been holding back. Jack leaned forward slightly, the microphone catching his quiet reply. "You're right." His tone was calm, measured, without defensiveness. The alerts were always meant to transition to the fire department after the trial period. I should have been clear about that. The system belongs to the town, not to me. Carl frowned, not expecting concession. "So you'll stop getting the pings." Jack nodded. "Immediately. The new protocol's already in motion." Claire studied him. He looked tired, but genuine, a man learning humility, one public meeting at a time. The moderator cleared his throat again. "That seems a fair resolution. Thank you, Mr. Hale and Ms. Whitman. Thank you for your measured insight." The crowd's energy shifted. The tension that had filled the room like static slowly dissipated, replaced by the low hum of side conversations. As the meeting wrapped, people began standing, stretching coats back onto shoulders, murmuring goodnights. Claire gathered her notebook, but before she could leave, she felt someone approach. Jack stood beside her. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "You could have let them take their shot." "I'm not interested in mob justice," she said, slipping her pen into her pocket. "I just want the truth of the whole of it." His voice softened. "That's what scares most people. Maybe that's why I'm good at my job," she said. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes but hinted at gratitude. "You held that room better than I ever could. I've had practice holding worse." He looked at her, something unspoken passing between them, respect, weariness, maybe the fragile beginnings of trust again. "Walk you home?" he asked. She shook her head. "No need. I think I'll take the long way. Air's clear now." He nodded, understanding. "Good night, Claire." "Good night, Jack." She stepped out into the crisp evening. The air carried the briny scent of the docks, sharp but alive. Behind her, the town hall windows glowed, voices still murmuring inside, not arguments anymore, just conversation. As she walked down the street, the church bell struck 6, echoing against the water. Each note hung in the air a little longer than the last, like a heartbeat calming after a storm. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like running from the noise. She felt like part of it, a voice among many, not shouting, just steady. The morning sunlight fell through the kitchen blinds in thin, trembling stripes. Claire was halfway through her first cup of coffee when her phone buzzed 3 times. Quick, insistent. Martha's name lit up the screen. "Don't panic." The text began, which, of course, made panic the only option. Below it was a link. A regional blog she vaguely recognized, the kind that fed on gossip, real estate listings, and society sightings that were anything but. She clicked. Her heart stopped. Billionaire's new flame, local nurse, seen dining with Jack Hale before restaurant scare. There she was, frozen, mid-laugh at the restaurant table. Adam's face half-cropped, her hair damp with fog, the camera angled from outside the glass. Another image, her standing with Jack in the rain, his hand near her shoulder, her face turned up toward him, gratitude mistaken for something else. The photos glowed under a slick headline banner. The comments were worse. Of course she'd attract a rich one. Some people always land on their feet. Widows have their ways. Claire set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. Outside, a gull shrieked against the window. Inside, the world she'd managed to keep private for 8 years tilted on its axis. By 8:15, everyone in town had seen it. By 8:30, her coworkers were texting politely worded "Are you okay?" messages that stung worse than gossip. At 8:45, she realized Theo would see it too. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her reflection in the cold coffee. When she finally looked up, she caught sight of herself in the microwave door, tired eyes, hair still messy from sleep. The woman in the photo looked younger, softer, easier to judge. At school pickup that afternoon, whispers followed her like perfume. She stood at the end of the line, hands shoved deep in her pockets. The other parents' smiles came tight-lipped, sympathetic in that way. That wasn't sympathy at all. Theo ran to her, backpack half open. "Mom, people were talking about Mr. Hale," he said, breathless. "They said you were on TV." She crouched to zip his bag. "It's not TV, honey. Just people with cameras and opinions." He frowned. "You don't like opinions. Not when they're wrong," she said, forcing a small smile. "Come on, bud." By the time they reached home, exhaustion had pooled in her bones. She made Theo a grilled cheese, kissed his forehead, and told him to start his homework. Then she sat on the porch steps, phone in hand, staring at the sea until the horizon blurred. It wasn't hard to guess who had something to gain from this. Jack's name carried weight. Hers didn't. A story like this made clicks. Attention fundraising gold. Anger crept in slow, thick as fog. She imagined him on a conference call, carefully deflecting questions, pretending innocence. The thought hollowed her. She typed his number into her phone, thumb hovering over call. Then she stopped. What would she even say? Why would you do this? It sounded petty, beneath her. But betrayal rarely asks for eloquence. She was still staring at the screen when a car pulled up to the curb. Adam. He looked awful unshaven, eyes red, still wearing the same jacket from the night of the dinner. He climbed the steps slowly, holding up both hands. "Please," he said, "just give me 2 minutes." Claire crossed her arms. "You've got one." "It wasn't him," Adam said. It was. He stopped, exhaling hard. "It was my ex, Jill. She saw our texts, the photo from when we first sat down. She thought I was moving on too fast." His voice cracked. "I didn't even know she had the pictures. She must have been outside the restaurant that night." Claire blinked. "You're saying she took them. She works for that blog now. Freelance. I guess she wanted to hurt me. You just..." He swallowed. "You got caught in the crossfire." For a long moment, Claire said nothing. The anger she'd been nursing began to drain away, replaced by something quieter, sadder. "She didn't just hurt you," she said. "I know." He sat on the railing, rubbing his temples. "I'm so sorry, Claire. I'd take it back if I could." "I know you would," she said softly. They sat in silence, the wind threading through the porch railings. Somewhere down the street, a child's bicycle bell rang, light and oblivious. After a while, Adam said, "Jill's deleting the post. She called them already. It'll come down within the hour." "It doesn't matter," Claire said. "Once it's online, it's permanent. Like ink spilled on the sea." He looked up, eyes tired. "Can I make it right somehow?" She shook her head. "No, and that's not your fault. But this," she gestured between them. "Whatever this was starting to be, it can't grow on top of something like that. It's not fair to either of us." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, the understanding almost too heavy to bear. "You're right, I'm sorry," she said. "So am I." When he left, he didn't try to hug her. He just touched the brim of his cap and walked back to his car, his silhouette shrinking against the setting sun. Inside, the house was quiet again. The air smelled faintly of melted cheese and ocean wind. Theo was humming softly in the living room, oblivious to everything except the math worksheet in front of him. Claire picked up her phone. The post had already been taken down, replaced by a hollow error 404. The damage, of course, was already done. Still, she found herself scrolling to Jack's name. For the first time all day, her hands didn't shake. She opened a new message. "It wasn't you. I'm sorry." She hit send. No typing bubbles appeared. No instant reply. Just the quiet satisfaction of having said what was necessary and no more. She set the phone down beside her and watched the sun sink behind the water, its last edge trembling like a coin slipping out of sight. The tide would turn again. It always did. But for now, she let herself feel the stillness, the small mercy of knowing the truth. The ocean had that late autumn restlessness, waves pressing hard against the breakwater, spraying salt across the rocks. The gulls were gone for the day, replaced by the low hum of wind threading through the harbor ropes. Claire stood at the far end of the stone path, coat pulled close, watching the horizon blur into steel gray. She'd come here to be alone. It was where she came when she needed to think, where she'd once scattered Ben's ashes. But when she turned, she saw Jack walking toward her, hands deep in his pockets. His coat collar was turned up, eyes shadowed against the wind. She wasn't surprised to see him not after the text she'd sent 2 nights ago. It wasn't you. I'm sorry. Still, she wasn't ready for whatever would follow. Wind's rough today, he said when he reached her. It usually is, she replied. That's why I like it. He smiled faintly. You always did prefer truth with sharp edges. Bluntness is cheaper than therapy, she said, turning back toward the water. Besides, it's the only thing that cuts through the noise lately. Jack nodded, gaze steady on the waves. You didn't have to defend me at that town meeting. I didn't, she said. I defended what was right. There's a difference. He accepted that with a small nod. The wind caught his hair, and for a moment, neither spoke. The sea filled in the space between them, vast and patient. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter, more uncertain than she'd ever heard it. There's something I've never told you. She turned slightly, cautious. That usually means trouble. It might, he admitted, but I think you deserve to know. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. The paper soft with age. He didn't hand it to her right away, just held it, staring at the creases. After Ben's accident, he began, I saw the obituary in the Gloucester Times. I didn't know then what connected us. Just the name Whitman. It stuck. Years later, I was reviewing community grant files for one of the foundations. There was a draft letter from a nurse named Claire Whitman not submitted, just saved in a folder by a coordinator. It was a request for funding a clinical trial slot for a child with severe asthma. Claire's breath caught. That was Theo, she said softly. He nodded. You never sent it. But someone on the committee had kept it, maybe thinking to ask later. I saw your name, and I remembered. I called the hospital's research office the next day and paid for an anonymous sponsorship slot. I made sure your son's name was on it before the trial closed. Claire's throat tightened. The world seemed to tilt. The roar of the ocean suddenly distant, hollow. That trial, she whispered. Boston Children's. The new inhaler prototype. Yes, Jack said. The one that worked. She pressed a hand to her mouth. That's why we got in off the wait list. I thought it was a clerical miracle. He smiled faintly. Maybe it was. Just one with a billing address. Her mind spun through the years, the nights spent sitting by Theo's bed, listening for wheezes that never came again, the way he'd finally been able to ride his bike without stopping every block, every milestone, every breath, all of it quietly funded by the man who'd caused her husband's death without ever knowing it. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. Why didn't you ever tell me? He looked at her, eyes wet with salt, maybe from the wind, maybe not. Because claiming something like that feels like owning it, and I've owned too much already. The words landed heavy. She wanted to be angry to accuse him of playing God, of manipulating fate, but something inside her refused, because she'd seen enough of Jack now to know it wasn't pride that drove him. It was penance. Still, she shook her head. You can't atone by hiding. Jack, you can't love people from behind a curtain. I wasn't trying to be noble, he said. I just thought it was better if you never knew. It wasn't, she said simply. It's never better when truth comes last. The wind lifted, snapping at her hair. She stepped closer, voice low but firm. You say you care about fixing things, but care isn't quiet. It doesn't hide in checks and foundations. It stands next to people when the wind hits. He met her gaze, searching. And if they don't want me there, then you stay anyway, she said. Not to be forgiven, just to be seen. For a long moment, neither moved. The sea thrashed below, foamy and cold. A fishing buoy knocked softly against the rocks, steady as a heartbeat. Jack finally unfolded the letter and handed it to her. "I kept a copy," he said. She took it carefully. Her own handwriting stared back at her shaky, uneven, from a time when exhaustion had blurred everything. She'd written about Theo's diagnosis, the medications that barely worked, the hope that something experimental might give him a childhood not measured in rescue inhalers. She'd ended with a single line, "I don't need charity. I just need a chance." Claire's eyes burned. She folded the paper again, this time slowly, reverently. "He got his chance," she said quietly. Jack nodded. "I know. And so did you." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean, redemption?" she said. "It's not something you buy. It's something you live. And you've already started. You just keep mistaking guilt for grace." The words seemed to catch him off guard. He didn't respond right away, just looked out over the water, the horizon gilded faintly by the sinking sun. Finally, he said, "You always did see too much. That's what nurses do," she said. He smiled, then a real one. "Fragile but true. You know, I don't regret paying for that trial." "I know you don't," she said. "But I wish you'd given me the chance to say thank you sooner." He looked at her, and something in his face shifted, not quite peace, but relief. The kind that comes from finally being seen without pretense. The wind rose, tossing spray high enough to touch their faces. Claire stepped back, eyes on the horizon. "Come on," she said softly. "It's getting dark." Jack turned to follow, but before they left the breakwater, she paused. "For what it's worth," she said without looking at him, "Theo still uses that inhaler. He biked 2 miles farther this summer than he ever had before." Jack's breath hitched. "That's good," he murmured. "That's really good." She smiled faintly. "It is. But next time, don't save people in silence. Jack, it's too lonely a way to live." They walked back together, the last light fading behind them, the wind softening as though the sea itself had grown tired of shouting. The town's old meeting hall never looked more ordinary. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the kind that made every coffee cup shine too white. Rows of mismatched folding chairs filled the space, half occupied by townspeople in work boots, worn flannel, and oil-stained jackets. The kind of crowd that didn't clap easily. A battered metal coffee urn hissed on a side table, flanked by donuts that had gone soft in the box. No reporters from Boston this time, no cameras beyond the local paper's intern with a phone tripod, and yet, for all its simplicity, the air in the room felt electric. Jack Hale stood at the front, one hand resting lightly on a podium that had seen decades of town budgets and bake sale announcements. He looked different, less like a billionaire, more like a man who'd been weathered by what he'd learned. The lines around his eyes weren't from smiling. They were from carrying too much. Claire watched from the second row, a pen tucked into her notebook she hadn't opened yet. She hadn't come to be seen. She came because something told her this was the moment when everything would either settle or shatter. Jack cleared his throat, the microphone squealing once before yielding. "Thank you for coming," he began, voice steady but stripped of polish. "I know some of you didn't have much faith in me after how this started, and I can't say I blame you." A low murmur rippled through the chairs. He went on. "The carbon monoxide alert system worked, but the way it worked wasn't fair. No one person should hold control over public safety, especially not someone who doesn't live every day in this town. The system's been transferred. All alerts now go directly to the fire department. And, starting today, oversight will rotate through a citizen committee chosen by the town." He paused. The fire chief, seated near the back, gave a small nod. Jack's tone softened. "It's not about taking credit anymore. It's about building something that lasts longer than anyone's name." He looked up, then not at the cameras, but at the people in front of him. "There's another piece to this." He unfolded a single page of notes but barely glanced at it. 9 years ago, this town lost jobs, families, and futures because of decisions my company made. I've spent too long trying to fix things from the shadows. That ends now." The room quieted. Even the coffee urn hissed softer. "Today," Jack said, The Hale Foundation is establishing the Ben Whitman Worker Transition Scholarship. It'll provide $250,000 a year for retraining and certification programs for local workers, trade school, tech school, nursing, whatever helps rebuild from the inside. Every graduate's name will be read out loud at the annual ceremony, because repair doesn't belong to systems. It belongs to people. His voice faltered slightly on that last line. He didn't cover it up. A few heads bowed. Someone cleared their throat. Jack stepped back from the mic, but then he hesitated, looking down at his hands, at the calluses that didn't belong to him but to every man he'd once displaced. "That's all?" he said simply. "Thank you." He turned to step away. But before he could leave the podium, Claire rose from her chair. The motion was quiet but magnetic. Heads turned. She walked to the front, her boots clicking softly on the scuffed wooden floor. Jack's eyes widened, surprised, uncertain. She didn't ask permission. She just took the microphone from its stand. "Ben Whitman," she said. Just his name. Nothing else. It echoed once through the room, a name too familiar, too human, to belong to any headline. She took a breath. Voice steady now. "He was my husband. He worked at Kittredge Marine for 14 years. He built things with his hands, things that kept other people safe at sea. He died on a night so cold, the road itself turned against him. For years, I blamed every piece of that story, the weather, the plant, the man behind the plant." Her eyes found Jack's for a brief moment. But blame doesn't build anything. Names do. When we speak them, we remember who the work is for. The room went silent again. Not empty silent, but reverent. She looked out over the crowd, men in Carhartt jackets, women with folded arms and tearful eyes, the faces of a town that had carried both resentment and hope in the same heartbeat. "This scholarship," she said, "isn't about making peace. It's about making progress. So every time someone earns their second chance, say his name, say all the names, because forgetting is how we lose ourselves again." Her voice caught just slightly at the end. She stepped back from the microphone, eyes shining but unflinching. Jack didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he stood. He didn't clap. He just nodded. Once. Deeply. It was enough. One by one. The people in the folding chairs rose to their feet, not in applause, but in silence. A standing acknowledgement. Respect for a man they'd lost. For the woman who refused to let his story end in bitterness. And for the man learning what accountability looked like when it stopped being a press release. For a moment, the room felt suspended, like the tide holding its breath before turning. Claire stepped aside, letting Jack back to the podium. He didn't speak again. He only looked out over the crowd, the people he'd spent years trying to save from a distance, and this time, he looked with them, not down at them. When the meeting adjourned, the noise returned in fragments. Chairs scraping, murmured thanks, the hiss of the coffee urn refilling. But something underneath had shifted, not fixed, not finished, but shifted. As Claire walked toward the door, a man in a work jacket touched her arm. "My brother worked with Ben," he said quietly. "Thanks for saying his name." She smiled, small but genuine. "That's what it's for." Outside, dusk had settled over the harbor. The new seawall glimmered faintly in the light solid, curved, built to take the weight of waves without breaking. Jack joined her on the steps. Neither spoke for a while. "Finally," she said. "That was the right way to do it." He nodded. "Took me long enough to learn how." She looked toward the sea. Some lessons are supposed to take time. A gust of wind lifted the edge of her coat. He steadied it with one hand, then let go. They both stood there, watching the tide ease against the wall, not fighting, just meeting resistance the way it should. The bell over the diner door jingled as a gust of December air slipped through the frame. Claire didn't look up right away. She was busy cutting Theo's pancakes into even squares. He insisted they taste better that way. The diner was a small, one linoleum floors, chrome stools, the smell of bacon grease and coffee grounds baked into the walls. It was a place that didn't change much, even as everything else around town did. Theo was mid-story, explaining in exacting 8-year-old detail how his science project volcano almost erupted in the classroom. His hands flew as he spoke, syrup glistening on his fingers. Claire smiled, half listening, letting the warmth of routine sink in. Then a shadow crossed the window, 3 short taps against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. She looked up. Jack stood outside, his breath visible in the cold, one hand raised in a tentative wave. No coat and driver this time, just a navy sweater, wind-blown hair, and that expression that always seemed caught between apology and hope. Theo spotted him first. "Mom, it's Mr." Hale Claire's eyebrows lifted, amused despite herself. "So it is." Jack didn't move until she smiled a small, measured invitation. Then he opened the door, letting the bell announce him like a question. "Hey," he said, voice soft, almost shy. "Hey," she echoed. Theo grinned wide enough for both of them. "Want some pancakes? We have extra syrup." Jack glanced toward the counter, then back at Claire. "Only if I'm not interrupting." "You're fine," she said, motioning toward the booth. "But next time, maybe text before showing up at a window." He laughed quietly. Fair. Instead of taking the seat across, he slid into the booth beside her, not too close, just enough for Theo to stay at the center. The boy beamed, clearly delighted by this new geometry. "Good syrup," Jack said, pouring a careful ribbon over his plate. 2 tablespoons. "Right." Theo nodded solemnly. 3 makes it soggy. Jack chuckled, noted. For a while, they ate in companionable silence. The diner's hum wrapped around them, clinking cups, the sizzle from the griddle, the radio murmuring an old Van Morrison tune. Ordinary sounds that felt almost sacred in their normalcy. Claire sipped her coffee, watching Theo swing his legs under the table. She caught Jack doing the same, his expression unguarded, softened by something close to peace. He finally spoke. I wanted to thank you for the other day at the announcement." "You don't have to," she said. "I know, but I want to." He hesitated. It meant something, hearing his name said out loud. "It meant something to say it," she replied quietly. Theo interrupted, tugging on her sleeve. "Mom, did you tell him I got an A on my project?" She smiled. "Not yet." Jack leaned down, pretending to whisper. "I had a volcano explode in college once. Physics lab. Fire alarm, sprinklers, the works." Theo's eyes widened. Seriously, seriously," Jack said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Don't tell your mom." Claire laughed a real, unguarded laugh that startled her as it escaped. It felt lighter than it should have. Jack caught the sound and smiled, not at her, but because of her. When the plates were empty and the coffee half gone, the conversation found its way to steadier ground. "So," she said, folding her napkin, "if we're going to keep orbiting the same town, maybe we should set some rules." "Rules," he echoed, though there was warmth in his tone. "Boundaries," she said. "Schedules. Clarity." He nodded. "I'm listening. No unannounced rescues. No showing up without notice unless it's literally life or death." "Got it. And if you feel that impulse again, the need to fix or protect, call me first." He looked at her, caught off guard. "Call you, yes," she said. "Not your team. Not your foundation. Me. If you're about to make a choice that affects my life or this town, let me stand there with you when the wind hits." He was quiet for a long moment. The diner's hum filled the pause, the kind of stillness that feels alive rather than empty. Then he nodded slowly. "Deal. Good." She offered a small smile. "You're not bad at listening when you try." He grinned. "I had a good teacher." Theo was already distracted, building syrup bridges between crumbs. Jack watched him with a look Claire had seen once before at the breakwater when he spoke about ballast and steadying ships. It wasn't paternal, not presumptive. It was simple awe, the kind that comes from witnessing life go on. Theo looked up suddenly. "Hey, Mr. Hale. Yeah. Buddy, can you come to the school fair next week? We're showing the projects. There'll be cookies." Jack blinked, surprised. "Cookies? Huh, that's a hard bargain." Claire gave a small shrug. "Your choice." He smiled at Theo. "Then I'll be there." Theo grinned and turned back to his plate. Satisfied. Jack looked at Claire again. "That okay with you?" She met his gaze. "It's okay." For a moment, the world outside the window blurred snow starting to fall, the kind that drifted sideways and melted before it landed. The reflection in the glass caught all three of them in the same frame: a nurse, a boy, and a man who'd once thought money could fix anything. Now he knew better. Claire reached for the check before he could. "My turn," she said. He opened his mouth to argue, then saw her expression and backed off with a smile. "Yes, ma'am." When they stood to leave, Theo slipped his small hand into each of theirs, unthinking. Natural. Claire didn't let go. Neither did Jack. Outside, the wind carried the smell of salt and diesel from the harbor. The snow had already stopped. The street shimmered wet under the streetlights, reflecting three shadows walking side by side, uneven, imperfect, but steady. The nor'easter arrived the way rumors do, whispered for days, dismissed, then suddenly everywhere at once. By sundown, the wind was howling through the harbor like an old dog shaking off rain. The sky had gone slate gray, and the sea, restless for hours, began to climb the wall in white-tipped swells. At the shelter inside the town gymnasium, the air was thick with movement, folding cots unfolding, blankets passed down a human chain, the hiss of coffee percolators battling the sound of the storm outside. Claire moved between the rows like someone who'd done this 100 times, checking on elderly residents, adjusting pillows, soothing children too young to understand why the world suddenly roared. Her hair was tied up, her sleeves rolled. The badge on her vest read, "Volunteer, Rockport Medical Corps." Across the room, Jack Hale was stacking cots. No camera crew, no reporters, just him in work gloves, sleeves rolled, sweat on his brow. He worked quietly, side by side with the other's fishermen, a school principal, the postmaster. Nobody called him Billionaire anymore, just Jack. At one point, a gust slammed against the doors hard enough to make the gym shudder. Someone near the entrance laughed nervously. 40-mile winds, they said, muttered a man tightening the latch. Feels like 60. The lights flickered once, then again, and finally, they went out altogether. A collective sigh rippled through the room. Then, almost instantly, lanterns clicked on one by one, little golden circles of steadiness in the dark. The generators hummed to life, low and steady. Claire exhaled. "We're okay," she said to the group nearest her. "We've got backup." She meant it in more ways than one. At 1:52 a.m., the radio crackled, "Gull and Anchor Restaurant. Carbon monoxide alert sensor activation confirmed. System auto-routed to fire department. Units responding." Claire froze for a heartbeat, then smiled, a small, astonished thing. The new system was working. The right phones were ringing. Jack heard it too. Their eyes met across the dimly lit room, and, for a moment, neither said a word. It was as if the town itself had exhaled proof that something broken had been rebuilt, stronger this time. By 2:10 a.m., the rain turned from sheets to needles. The roof rattled, metal vents groaning against the gusts. Claire made her rounds again, flashlight in hand, stopping at each cot to check for warmth, breath, calm. Theo slept curled under two blankets in a corner, his inhaler tucked by his pillow like a guardian charm. His hair stuck to his forehead, his breathing soft and steady. She brushed a strand from his face, feeling a rush of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. When she straightened, Jack was beside her, offering a cup of coffee. "Figured you could use this," he said. She accepted, wrapping her fingers around the heat. "Thanks." For a while, they stood in silence, the sound of wind against the walls filling the space between them. It was strange how storms could make everything inside feel more intimate, like the rest of the world had receded, leaving only what mattered. Jack glanced toward the door. "Want to step out? Just for a minute." She hesitated, then nodded. They pushed open the emergency exit together. The wind hit instantly fierce, cold, tasting of iron and salt. The rain came in slantwise, stinging their faces, making them squint. The world outside was wild and alive, trees bending, streetlights swaying, waves crashing over the seawall. that had become the town's new spine. For 30 seconds, they stood there breathing it in. Jack laughed under his breath. "Remind me why we came out here again, to see what we built," she said, "and to remember what it costs." He turned to her, the storm's reflection flickering in his eyes. "I can't promise I won't be afraid again," he said quietly. Claire looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, she saw not guilt or control, but simple humanity. A man who'd finally learned that fear wasn't weakness, just proof of caring. "Being afraid," she said, "is how we start." The wind rose, whipping her words away almost before they landed. She took a step closer, steadying herself against his arm. "Staying," she finished, voice barely above the roar, "is how we finish." He nodded, eyes shining in the lantern glow spilling from the doorway. "Then we'll stay." For another breath, they stood together, two silhouettes against a furious sky, the kind of small defiance that keeps the world turning. Then Claire reached for the handle, pulling the door closed behind them. The latch caught with a soft, final click. Inside, the gym was warm and golden again, filled with the low chorus of sleeping breaths and murmured voices. Jack hung his jacket on the back of a chair and went back to stacking supplies. Claire checked on the generator fuel. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the lights and the people held steady. By dawn, the wind had eased. The tide receded, leaving behind salt lines and scattered driftwood along the seawall all intact. No broken glass, no flooded homes, just the faint hum of sirens winding down and the promise of morning. Theo stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. "Did the storm win?" he asked. Claire smiled, smoothing his hair. "No, sweetheart, we did." He grinned sleepily. "Can we go see the ocean later, after breakfast?" she said. "And after we help clean up." Jack passed by, carrying a stack of folded blankets. "I'll bring the coffee," he said. She met his eyes, smiling softly. "You always do." He gave a half smile, back one of quiet understanding, and turned toward the light streaming through the gym's high windows. Outside, the world was still dripping and gray, but alive. The seawall stood. The sensors had done their job. The town had too. And somewhere between fear and staying, they'd all found something steadier than safety, something like peace. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, not in grand apologies or perfect endings, but in the quiet courage to stay when it would be easier to leave. Claire and Jack's story reminds us that forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a slow, trembling choice we make again and again to see the human being behind the harm and to keep believing that people can change. We all carry storms inside us, guilt, grief, fear, and sometimes they collide. But when we let others stand beside us in that wind, something shifts. The world doesn't stop hurting, but it starts to make sense again. No one can rewrite the past. Yet, if we listen, if we stay, if we build instead of running, we might find that what's left after the storm isn't ruin at all, but a stronger kind of peace. Thank you for being here with us, for every minute you've spent listening, every tear you've held back, every quiet smile that found its way through. You've been part of something deeply human. At Shining Stories, we believe that kindness, empathy, and understanding are the bridges that hold this world together. Every like, every share, every subscribe isn't just support, it's a small light passed forward, helping another heart find its way home. So from all of us, truly thank you for listening, for feeling, and for believing in stories that touch the soul. We'll see you in the next one.